Piracy in the video game has been around forever and still got people talking. But what even is it? Is it straight up stealing or just taken into the system? Things like downloading cracked games, messing with mods, or snagging something off at torrents makes you wonder what is actually doing into the game industry. Is it destroying developers' hard work, or is there some weird way it actually helps them? And honestly, with stuff like Steam, Epic Games, and Game Pass making games super easy to get, why is piracy still even a thing? Before we go deeper into the reason why people pirate games, I want to explain the history of game piracy. Believe it or not, it's been around since before home consoles were even a thing. You see, back in the late 70s and early 80s, it started with the arcade machines and early home computers. People would create hacked versions of games or make unauthorized copies. For example, even Space Invader arcade cabinets were modded to run pirate games. It was small scale but it set the stage for what would come next. When home consoles blew up, especially after the gaming crash of 1983, piracy shifted to physical copies, cracking floppy disks, copying cartridges, and bootlegging games left and right. Fast forward to the 90s and early 2000s, and piracy exploded with the internet. CD burners and peer-to-peer sharing sites like the Pirate Bay, ISO Hunt, and Demonoid became hotspots for the pirate game. So the companies introduced a concept called Digital Right Management, or DRM, which was meant to stop piracy, but it just made the gamers mad. And some people started pirating games just to avoid the hassle of DRM. Even today, piracy hasn't gone away. Sure, torrents and cracked versions are still out there, but now we've got emulations too. People using software to play all or unavailable games. The whole piracy has evolved right alongside gaming itself. So with all that said, why do people still do it? Let's see it. So why do people pirate games? Well, one of the biggest reasons is affordability, because the game prices can be high, especially for AAA titles that can cost over $60. For many gamers, particularly students or people who just don't want to have a lot of disposable income, those prices are just too much. And even though platforms like Steam have sales and bundles, some people still turn to piracy, essentially because it is just cheaper to get the game for free. Then there is the issue of access. Not every game is available everywhere. Some regions get games months after their initial release, and others just flat out don't get them at all. In these cases, piracy is a quick way to get around those regional restrictions. And in some cases, there's a problem with the language barrier. Some people might pirate games just because they are not available in their native language, and they want to play them with a fan translation. Another reason is old games or abandonware. There are a ton of older games that aren't sold anymore, and people can just buy them from official stores. So piracy becomes the only way to get your hand on these classic games. And some even argue that it is necessary for game preservation, like keeping the old games alive so they are not lost to history. This is where emulators and pirated copies of older games really come into play. And convenience is a huge factor as well. With torrents and cracked versions, you can download and play the game instantly, no waiting around for shipments or regional unlocks. And pirated versions often come without the digital right management restriction that make life harder for legitimate buyers. Things like always online check or limited installation can be such a pain. With piracy, you don't have to deal with that. Some people also pirate just because they can try the game out first. No demo, no trial version? Well, some gamers just pirate it to test it out, especially if they are not sure if their system can run it or if the game's even worth a full price. In some cases, people play by pirating to see if the game's actually any good before making any decisions, which they might later regret. In some gaming communities, piracy just becomes a part of tradition. If everyone else is doing it, you might feel pressure to do the same. Plus, piracy makes it easier to access a ton of games all at once. So why buy each game when you can just pirate them all, right? Also, some people pirate as a kind of protest. They are fed up with the publisher's pricing models or with the constant microtransaction and other monetization tactics. For them, pirating a game is a way to say, I don't agree with you, and the way this industry is going is a little like floating with your wallet, just without actually spending any money. Piracy had a huge impact on the game industry, and it goes beyond just the lost money. In 2018, SuperData Research reported that piracy cost the industry over $8 billion in lost revenue. That includes people downloading cracked games and getting around paywalls. While not all pirated copies represent lost sales, some players may never have bought the game anyway. The financial damage is still massive. For smaller studios like the indie game developers, piracy can be a big blow. To fight back, industry has made some changes. We've seen a huge rise in digital platforms like Steam and Epic Game Store, with Steam alone making over $4 billion in sales in 2020. These platforms give players easy access to games and often offer discounts or special deals. Subscription services like Xbox Game Pass and PlayStation Plus have grown into popularity, offering gamers access to a huge library of games for a fixed monthly fee. This provides a legal and affordable alternative to piracy. In fact, news reported that the global gaming market was worth over $159 billion in 2019, with subscription service making up an increasingly important chunk of that. On top of that, some game companies have turned to digital rights management system to protect against piracy. Take Ubisoft for example, which introduced always online DRM for Assassin's Creed 2 back in 2009. The idea was that if players needed to be connected to the internet all the time to play the game, it would stop people from pirating it. But this caused a lot of backlash from legitimate players who were frustrated by needing a constant internet connection for single-player games. Interestingly, piracy has also changed how the industry operates. For example, digital marketplaces and subscription models have been developed partly as a way to make games more accessible, which in turn reduces the incentive to pirates. According to a 2019 European Commission report, about 35% of European gamers admitted to pirating games, but more than 50% of those pirated games were later bought legally after players tried them out. While this isn't something every game can rely on, it shows that piracy can sometimes act as a kind of free trial for players. Regardless, piracy is still a big challenge for the gaming industry. Major publishers are responding with digital storefronts and subscription service, while smaller indie developers still face a hard time against piracy. Back in 2019, Ubisoft made headlines when they said gamers should get more comfortable not owning their games. This statement was part of the larger conversation around digital rights management and the rise of subscription service. Ubisoft was essentially suggesting that in the future, owning a game may no longer be as important as being able to access it whenever they want. This is a direct response to the growing piracy problem. The company was looking for an alternative model that could provide a better experience for legitimate players while reducing the need for DRM protections that players find frustrating. If ownership of games becomes less about purchasing a physical copy and more about subscribing to have access to it, in a sense, piracy might seem less about stealing and more about accessing content that is otherwise gated by high prices or restrictive ownership models. And with a growing number of services like Xbox Game Pass and PlayStation Now, more players are leaning toward the idea that access is more important than owning a copy outright. According to a 2018 survey by SuperData Research, the global game industry lost an estimated $8.2 billion due to the piracy that year alone. This is a significant chunk of revenue, especially for smaller indie developers who can't afford to lose that kind of money. In fact, some studies suggest that piracy could cost developers anywhere from 10% to 50% of their potential sales, depending on the game and its market. While piracy might seem justified from the consumer perspective due to its issue like price of access, it can deeply affect the livelihood of those creating the games. On the flip side, there is the moral argument about whether game pricing is fair to begin with. For example, a AAA game like The Witcher 3 might be priced around $60 in the US, but in other regions, that same game might cost the equivalent of $80 or more. In some countries, the average income is a fraction of what it is in the US. So for people in these regions, piracy becomes a way to level the playing field and gain access to the product that they otherwise couldn't afford. And also, let's talk about the concept of game preservation. It is not uncommon for older games to disappear from digital stores or become unplayable due to the compatibility issues. In some cases, piracy can become a way of preserving gaming history. For example, when Steam or GOG removes a game from its catalog, it's often gone for good, leaving players with no legal means of accessing it. According to the Video Games History Foundation, hundreds of games from the 80s and 90s have already been lost due to the insufficient digital preservation. Some argue that piracy in these cases is more about keeping the legacy of the video game alive, rather than just causing harm to the industry. The truth is, piracy will never fully go away. As long as there are ways to crack games or bypass paywalls, there will be people looking for free access. But the way piracy impacts the industry might change as developers and publishers adapt to new realities. One of the biggest trends we are seeing is the rise of subscription services like Xbox Game Pass, PlayStation Plus, and even cloud gaming platforms like Nvidia GeForce Now. These services provide a massive library of games for a monthly fee, making it harder for piracy to compete. It's like Netflix for video games, and it's a model that's only going to grow. Also, cloud gaming could be a huge player in reducing piracy in the future, with services like Google Stadia, though it's been discontinued, and Xbox Cloud Gaming. Players don't actually download the games to their consoles or PCs. They stream them directly from the cloud. This means there is no actual fine to pirate in the first place. It's a system that makes piracy much harder to execute because there is no way to crack or distribute a game that is being streamed. On the flip side, the ongoing development of blockchain technology and NFTs could have an impact too. Some game developers are exploring ways to use blockchain to prove ownership of digital goods, which could make pirated versions of games much harder to pull off. If games are tied to unique tokens or assets that are stored on a blockchain, it might be more difficult to make an authorized copy. However, it's still unclear whether this approach will catch on, as there are some concerns about this impact on the gaming experience and whether players will accept this new way of handling ownership. But there is also a question of how to access piracy in regions where players simply can't afford games. Even with all these services and innovation, piracy is still prevalent in developing countries where game prices are high relative to local incomes. Developers will need to find ways to balance global accessibility with fair pricing. That might mean offering more regional pricing models or localized subscription options to make games more affordable and less likely to be pirated. Companies like Humble Bundle have already been experimenting with this model by offering sales that let players choose their price, and it's something that could spread further in the future. The future of piracy in a game isn't about removing it completely. It's more about creating systems where players have more affordable, accessible, and legal way to get games. As long as game companies continue to find ways to make legal options more attractive than pirated versions, piracy will likely continue to decrease over time. But there will always be people who choose the illegal route, so the industry will have to keep innovating to stay one step ahead. So piracy in game is one of those things that's never as simple as good or bad. People pirate games for different reasons. Some can afford them, others want to try before they buy, and while piracy might never fully disappear, technology like cloud gaming and more affordable options are definitely helping make it less appealing. At the end of the day, the game industry is adapting, but the real focus should be on understanding why piracy happens and finding better ways to meet players where they are. And that's where we will leave it for today. Thanks for watching.